Welcome to HR Studio Podcast. Through bi-weekly interviews with HR executives, thought leaders, authors, speakers, and trend spotters from the world of HR and beyond, we invite you to listen, learn, and leverage. Welcome to HR Studio Podcast, building the next generation of HR leaders. HR Studio Podcast is brought to you by A.J. O'Connor Associates, a trusted human capital consulting partner to emerging, mid-market, and world-class organizations. To learn more, visit us at ajoconnor.com.
So welcome everyone to HR Studio Podcast. I'm your host for today's episode. My name is Fred Bunsa, and I'm excited today to be joined by Lolly Daskal. Lolly is one of the more sought-after executive leadership coaches in the world. Looking through her bio, not only she's founded her own company, Lead From Within, where she helps be a catalyst for leaders, but she's also been awarded a lot of accolades. She's been designated as a top 50 leadership and management expert by Inc.com and 100 great leadership speakers by Your Next Inc. magazine. And also she's appeared in the Huffington Post, Fast Company, HBR, all kinds of other media outlets. So we are really honored and thrilled, Lolly, to have you with us today on HR Studio Podcast.
Fred, it's an honor and a privilege to be here.
What I wanted to talk with you today about, your book has been out for a bit now called The Leadership Gap, and in the last few years it's been really well acclaimed. And within that book, there are some leadership principles that I thought would be really helpful for us to hear, particularly as rising HR leaders. You have a simple leadership archetype, I think you refer to it as, and it goes by the acronym RETHINK. Tell us a little bit about how that works, and we'll dive into it a little bit more.
Absolutely. So most leaders, most individuals, they do a lot of thinking, and they think they know what they know. And I'm a big component. I'm a big believer in rethinking. Rethink what you don't know, you know. You know, sometimes we rely on the things we know to get us to the next level, but there are many things that we don't know that we need to learn. And my book has 7 archetypes that I talk about that makes us rethink who we are. What's interesting about this system, it might be simple, but it is complicated as life is, because it concentrates on who we are. Most books, most leadership books, most management books, most leadership classes, management classes, HR classes talk about a lot of processes and a lot about best practices. And I think and I believe, after being in my business for almost 3 decades, is that we miss out on the most important question. Who are we being as we are leading? And the leadership gap answers that question in 7 archetypes that we must embody.
Okay, can you walk us through those archetypes, and then we'll dive into some that might be particularly applicable to our rising HR leader audience?
Absolutely. So think about it as an acronym, RETHINK. R is for the rebel, E is for the explorer, T is for the truth teller, H is for the hero, I is for the inventor, N is for the navigator, and K is for the knight. Now, one thing, Fred, is very important. They might sound like they're very noble archetypes, but what's very, very important is that within these archetypes, there is a polarity of character. That means you could be the rebel, right? If you want to be the R, the rebel, know that it takes a lot of confidence to be the rebel. But if you don't have the confidence that you need, most likely the polarity of character, the imposter that is within ourselves, will show up, even if you wanted to or you don't want it to. So knowing the rethink system is important, because then you'll know when you're in stress, when you're in doubt, when you're at your wit's end, something will show up that you might not want to have show up, and other people will see it before you can see it yourself.
Interesting. I think in my Myers-Briggs training, they talked about the dark side or the shadow. Is that a similar kinds of concept?
So, because I'm a Jungian, I'm a Carl Gustav Jung, I practice that as a living. And so it is based on shadow work. And one thing that Jung said, what we don't own ends up owning us. So know this, that the parts that we consider shadows or weaknesses, if we don't own them and we say, oh, I don't want to talk about it, or I don't even want to address it, it will show up in ways that you're not even aware of. And actually, people will see it first before you see it yourself. And so it's very important to dive into this RETHINK system, only because it gives you insight and information that really helps you be the best version of who you need to be.
Interesting. So that quote one more time that Young said is, what we don't own ends up owning us.
Yeah.
Fascinating. Yes. Yeah. I mean, we see that all the time in our coaching practices, the blind spots people don't want to admit to, but I say, well, no sense having to admit to it. Everyone else knows that you're doing it anyway. So you might be the last one to find out that you're exhibiting this kind of behavior under these stressful conditions.
Absolutely. I always talk about the case of a balloon. Think of a balloon where you blow in a lot of air, and let's say the balloon is filled with all of who we are. And on one side is strengths and one side is weaknesses. If we end up squeezing down on our weaknesses because we don't want anybody to see, what happens to the other side of a balloon? It blows up. So we can't escape who we are. It tends to show up anyway.
That's a good analogy. You might see a balloon appearing at a future coaching one-on-one meeting that I have. How can HR leaders, rising HR leaders, best apply some of these principles? And let's start talking about ourselves, and then maybe we can shift to how they might apply to the people with whom we work.
Right. So if we were to go back to the framework of the RETHINK system, there are two archetypes that I really want to cover today in order to bring as much value as we can to your audience. The first one was the rebel. The rebel is an individual who wants to make an impact within their own lives and within those that they lead, those that they communicate with and work with. And in order to be a rebel, in order to make a true impact, you have to have confidence. But most people think this way. You'll see people saying, I believe in myself. That's how I have confidence. Or if I say affirmation, that's how I'll have confidence. And for me, that's not what I have found confidence is. What I have found, because I've been doing this for a long, long time, and I've been doing it with smart individuals like your audiences, is that confidence comes from this. It comes from your competence plus your capabilities equal confidence. That means if you're really good in your skills, if you're really good in your ability, you will have the confidence to show up, because confidence is just knowing you're able. Let me change that. Confidence is believing you're able. Competence is knowing you're able. And when you know you are able, that's when we take action. So that's very important to understand what confidence is all about. That's number one.
Okay.
Number two is that when we start to feel it, when we start to do this behavior, looking over our shoulder, comparing ourselves to others, not feeling that we don't measure up, self-doubt has a way of creeping in. And when self-doubt creeps in, there's a syndrome that becomes uncovered, and that's the imposter syndrome. The moment we start comparing ourselves to others, the moment we start measuring not within, but outside, is the moment the imposter shows up. And boy, when it shows up, it keeps us from doing our task. It doesn't allow us to believe we're capable of doing what we need to do. And we sound like this: I'm not really sure I'm the person that can do that. Or I'm not going to take that on because I don't have the skills I need. That's the imposter speaking. And we must be mindful what the imposter sounds like and why it comes up and where it comes up from.
So just let's break that down a little bit further, Lolly. Is that you said that the comparison is not an inner comparison. It's when you're comparing yourself to some outside standard. Is that what I heard you say?
Absolutely. The moment your sentence begins this way, look what Fred's doing, look what Jill's doing, look what Robert's doing, that's outside manifestation.
Okay.
That's when you're comparing yourself to others. And when you compare yourself to others, it's a lose-lose situation, because there's always going to be someone smarter than us and more skilled than we are. in order to really, really work on the imposter syndrome, we have to measure our self-worth, our capabilities from within. So if we say to ourselves, well, I need this and this skill in order to do my job, then the question is, what will you do to become more capable and more competent in order to be more confident?
So you mentioned at the start about rethinking, right? So rethinking what we know. So I'm just wondering how this applies, because someone could say, well, rethinking, going back and sort of revisiting all that could be a form of self-doubt. Like, do I really know as much as I do? And yet not having that ability to reflect could lead to some arrogance because I think I know more than I do. So now we're in a conundrum. Help us out, Lolly.
Absolutely. So I really believe that this is a very important, first of all, that was a brilliant question, because I'm sure this is what's on people's mind. We always must go back in order to stay present and move to the future. And how this works is that we can't get stuck in the past. We need to look at the past, learn from the past, stay present today and saying, what do I need to learn today in order to be better in the future? If we get stuck in the past, we stay in the past. Think about it as, the mud that you walk into, what is that mud, the sinking mud where you just what is that called? For a minute. Quicksand, right. If you stay stuck in the past, it is quicksand. Thank you, Fred. But if you are very present in the past, meaning you learn from it, you say, what can I learn? What didn't work? What worked? And start to create a blueprint for today that will help you in the future. That is what we need. If you don't want to look at the past, go back to the balloon thing. If you don't look at the past and you don't learn from the past, it'll blow up in the future. So learn what you have to so you don't repeat the patterns, because life has another thing that it happens to us, that if we don't learn our mistakes, it will show up again and again and again. So help yourself with your life. Look at your patterns, look at your past to create a better future.
Okay. And so Lolly, given the 7 leadership types, is this about us choosing one, or would you say that we actually, are most inclined to one and we don't really choose it? We're wired or we're predisposed towards it?
Fred, thank you for asking that. Again, another brilliant question and great insight. And people always say to me, which archetype am I? And something very important about these archetypes is that we are all these archetypes. That's why it's important to know the whole RETHINK system, because they stand for different virtues within ourselves. And if we want to be the best version, the book is called What Gets Between You and Your Greatness. If you want to live your greatness, if you want to own your true self, you must learn the 7 virtues that stand for these 7 archetypes in order to be a complete human being, in order to be the best human being. And this is what I always say to my clients: choose before a meeting, choose before an encounter, choose before a situation. Which archetype do you need to be in this moment in order to get the best results? It's almost like having your own inner coach. You don't need to have Lolly with you all the time. You can just pick up the leadership gap, learn the system, and ask yourself that question in order to bring out the best version in that circumstance.
And so these are paths we can follow, and we can summon them when we need them in a particular meeting or a particular environment, a one-on-one conversation, anything like that.
Right.
Okay.
And it's best to do it when you're stressed out. When you are stressed out about a situation, when you find yourself in an uncomfortable situation, it is best to pause, regroup, and rethink and ask yourself, which archetype do I need to be in this moment? And we talked about the rebel. Maybe you'll need to be confident, but maybe, and I want to talk about this archetype because I think it's very important for your audience particularly, and it's about the navigator. We've moved down the RETHINK system and we've moved now into the navigator. The navigator is a very practical and pragmatic individual, and people trust them because they're really good at what they do. And usually what happens is a navigator will be in a meeting, will be in a certain circumstance, and people will look for them for leadership and ask them to guide them. And if we're not careful, we will fall into the gap of being the fixer who is arrogant. If we are very smart, if we are very capable, we will answer a question this way. If someone says, Fred, I have a problem with this. Fred, who's very capable, might say, do it this way, do it that way. And we have to understand that's not our greatness. Our greatness lies in navigating and not fixing. Our greatness lies, people trust us more when we're navigating than we're fixing and when we are coming across as arrogant. So we must use this archetype all the time in our personal life and in our professional life. If your partner says, I have a problem, don't fix their problem. Listen and be silent and navigate through questions to help them.
Sounds very much like what we all would be trained in for those of us who are executive coaches, is to be reluctant or slow to jump in with an answer or a solution, and to use some well-timed, well-pointed questions instead of that. Is that the heart of what you're getting at, the navigator?
That's beautifully put, exactly what I'm talking about. You will have a longer run if you navigate rather than fix. Nobody really wants a fixer. Unless someone says, can you help me fix this? Which I think only happens like 10% of the time. Usually people just want you to listen to what's going on and then to ask the questions that they feel smart enough and empowered enough to take their own action.
And it would seem like, Lolly, that a lot of us in the HR space would, and maybe that's why you selected this navigator one to speak about. Yes, I can see you nodding. Yes. So your hunch and your experience, probably even more so, is that there's a lot of us navigators who end up in HR roles because we do navigation well. So I guess the downside is we can become fixers without realizing it.
The HR, I feel, is the heart of every organization. And I mean it in a couple of ways. It's the heart because it's the hub of an organization, but also they bring their heart. And when you bring your heart, you kind of want to make things go away. So you'll want to fix the problem. That is the worst thing that we can do. A great HR leader is not a fixer, but a navigator. And I think it's important. And they must rely on their rebel within to have the confidence in their capabilities and their competence to lead in a navigation way. See how they all interact? And that's where the brilliance lies.
Yeah. Are there other classic challenges that HR leaders are often called in to do some coaching for a leader? Can you give us some other examples, Lolly, of where someone who's outside of HR, but maybe is in a senior leadership position, where some of these other archetypes can, the brilliance of it can actually become the stumbling block of it, and HR is often called in to help resolve that?
Right. I mean, each one of these archetypes really pertains to your audience. And actually, it pertains to every living human being. This can be curtailed to each individual. It doesn't matter what field you're in. But think about the explorer. The explorer is someone who wants to be able to help people navigate through ways they've never been before. So that means an individual that is having difficulty. And so you want to take on the persona, the archetype of exploring. If you don't take on the archetype of exploring, you end up exploiting people. And that sounds very harsh, but it sounds like this. Would you like to try this or try this? So it's very different. And we have to be very mindful of how we communicate to individuals, because one will shut them down and one will make them stand up. One will make them blossom. And we have to be very mindful of who we are being as we are leading others.
So that, could you phrase it this way, Lolly, just so I understand it, that the exploiter really doesn't leave anyone with any option except maybe one, and it's the option that the person who's giving the advice thinks best, and versus the explorer would open up multiple options and help them understand the pros and the cons of each?
Absolutely. An explorer goes to uncharted territories. What's interesting about the explorer is learning as much as the one who needs to be explored with. It's a real partnership of, we're going to do this together. We're going to go to uncharted territories together. It's a partnership that makes both feel they're on the same level. We're going to do this together. We're going to succeed together. Instead of, I'm the leader, I know best, I'm the expert and you're going to do it this way. That really doesn't work for any individual. It actually infuriates people and frustrates them.
Hmm. And Lolly, do you find that when you're coaching people and you're talking about these archetypes, that people are able to use them in kind of a facile way, like they're able to in the moment recall these and use them in a practical way? I mean, I know sometimes with Myers-Briggs, 16 types, and they can barely remember their own, and so it becomes wonderful for a one-on-one deep conversation. But what I found is that people quickly sort of get confused about them, and they're just hard to use going forward. How do you help people keep these clear in their mind when you're not speaking to them and taking them through it?
Right. That's why there's only 7. That's why there's an acronym of RETHINK. We do a lot of thinking. And if you can say to us, I need to rethink and understand who you need to be, it's actually, I've done this for over 3 decades in an organization, in vibrant organization, in healthy cultures. They'll be in meetings and they say, you know what? We need a knight. We need a rebel. They have shortcuts that they use this as a tool. I've seen educators use this. Financiers use this. I've seen nurses, hospitals use this. What you need in this moment, they use it as a shortcut. It's only 7. You said in the beginning, it sounds simple. It is simple, but yet it's a game changer.
Great. So as you think about some final thoughts for our audience, as I mentioned, our podcast is really targeted to rising HR leaders. What would be a way for them to get started in this and actually use it for themselves and for others to really make a difference for themselves?
I'm going to plug, because I'm going to pick up my book, and I'm going to say the first thing is get the leadership gap.
Okay.
Truly utilize the system, because it's a game changer. But something I really want to say to your audience, and if I speak, if I coach, if I do a workshop, and I've been doing this for a long time, something keeps coming up all the time. And it does stem from the imposter syndrome. When someone is thinking, I don't know if I have greatness within me, I don't know if I can truly succeed, I want to just say this one message to everybody listening to your podcast. I know for a fact there is greatness within every single person. The only thing, Fred, is they have to choose it. The moment you choose it is the moment. Think about it this way. They say when you need to know something, the teacher comes along.
Right.
Well, the teacher is the leadership gap. It can teach you to really stand in your greatness. If you don't choose greatness, most likely you are standing in your gap.
Wow. Well, Lolly, thank you so much for not only giving us some insights into how you coach and how you help leaders, but also how we can help ourselves by thinking about this gap, minding the gap, as they say out here in the New York City subway system, mind the gap. And that is advice for leadership as well as for subways, it sounds like. So I just want to remind all of our listeners that you can find more information on Lolly and her book by going on to our website, hrstudiopodcast.com. And there you'll also be able to sign up and subscribe for episodes as well. And Lolly, again, thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and your insights with us today and our studio listeners.
Thank you so much for having me.
Have a great day.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the HR Studio podcast. To download complimentary resources from this week's episode and to catch up on past episodes, please visit hrstudiopodcast.com. Subscribe to the HR Studio podcast list and social channels while there to receive alerts and recaps on all our episodes. HR Studio Podcast is brought to you by A.J. O'Connor Associates. For over 35 years, AJO has built its reputation on experienced listening, exceptional quality, and caring partnerships, delivering in 30 states and 20 countries. To learn more and subscribe to AJO's Top 100 HR blog, visit us at ajoconnor.com.